Hi, guys. We'll talk a little bit about 529s here, give some initial thoughts. As a general rule of thumb, 529s just need to have a little bit different mindset and strategy when you compare them to longer term investment accounts. And so IRA, 401k, everything from our last video applies. Now with 529s, it's just a little bit more emphatic in terms of there really needs to be some guardrails around that strategy. And here's what I mean. So first of all, time frame. 529s have a very, very specific time frame. Now, when your kids are young, when your kids are 5 and under, really doesn't matter. You can treat it just like any other investment. You can treat it as if it's a 401k IRA and you're 20 years away from using it. Nothing wrong with, taking tremendous amounts of exposure in the stock market and really gearing for long-term growth. And that's also where you're going to see the most impact with a 529 when you start young. It grows just like a Roth IRA. And so the advantage there is starting young and getting a tremendous amount of tax-free growth. Now, knowing that time frame, that really switches substantially. So big difference between 529 and a retirement plan. With a retirement plan, you're talking about assets where, yes, you may retire. Let's pretend you're 55 and you're wanting to retire at age 60. So you want to be cognizant of that time frame. But in reality, turning 60 and retiring does not completely change your portfolio in a substantial way. Because when you retire, we're talking about a 30-year, 40-year long retirement where you're not going to use all that money in the first couple of years. With a 529 plan, you are. So when your kids turn 13, 14 years old, all of a sudden it is important to get pretty safe. And having significant cash bond exposure in a 529 becomes not just important, but it's essential. You really have to do it. Whereas retirement, that's like that's a terrible idea to get overly safe if that money needs to last for 40 years. But in college, this money just needs to last for 4 years. And so protecting that principal that we save becomes really important. So time frame is critical. Be aggressive early, be aggressive often, but when they turn 12, 13, 14 years old, begin to really adjust and take some of that risk off the table. Annual limits with 529 plans. You are allowed, the IRS allows you to save a lot in 529s. So you can bunch 5 years worth of gifts into one, which really means you can put about $75,000 into each 529 plan for each of your kids. Then that begs the question, well, how much should we put in? And a couple different thoughts there. We want to just plan around the usage for 529s. What I mean by that is this 529, is it going to be funding simply college, or is it also going to be funding private school, whether that's elementary, junior high, or high school? And so it's something to really think about. And it's also something where you don't necessarily have to have the answer today, but let's pretend that you've got a 3-year-old. And that 3-year-old, you might do public school, but you're also thinking you could potentially do private. And let's pretend in that worst case scenario, you're going to be using a lot of assets to pay for private school. Maybe your kid's a genius, or public school's just not a fit. You want a more custom approach, and you decide you want to send your kid to the John Cooper School. And a 529 has the ability to pay for private K through 12 tuition. And so it can be used in that manner. So that's another way to look at how much should go into these accounts. After we max out retirement plans, get the tax deductions for those, 529s can really be funded in a pretty significant way. If you think about each kid today, if you put $50,000 in a 529 and it doubles over the next decade or so, and then it's $100,000, that's going to give you a pretty good base for what you're going to need to pay for a state school. Now, if we're wanting to potentially look at private colleges, we may need more. And so that's why putting $75,000 in each kid's 529 is not necessarily a bad idea. If you're wanting your kid to go to NYU or SMU or any Ivy League school, putting $75,000 in today, having it grow to $200,000 15 years from now, that's you're not crazy. That's not overfunding it. But We definitely don't want to end up with a 529 that has $400,000 in it and your kid ends up going to a state school. And so it's just properly planning around the usage and having an understanding that the time frame on 529s, yes, it's the same when your kids are young, but they've got to get way safer once your kids become teenagers. And we'll dive in deeper in face-to-face appointments, but that gives you a little bit of a background and a mindset, a way to think about the 529s.